It began not with an announcement, not with a scandal, but with a silence so loud that fans across continents could feel it. One moment, Sukai and Tan Songyun were everywhere, sharing frames, exchanging glances that felt too real to be scripted, igniting screens with a chemistry that blurred the line between performance and something dangerously close to truth. And then, suddenly, nothing. No joint projects. No public interactions. Not even the faintest digital echo of what once seemed like an unbreakable on-screen partnership. At first, it felt like coincidence. Scheduling conflicts. Perhaps. The industry is vast, unpredictable. But as months turned into a full year, the absence began to feel deliberate, calculated, almost. Fans who had once celebrated their effortless synergy started to rewind old clips, searching not for romance, but for cracks. And that's when the details began to emerge. A slowed-down scene from one of their final collaborations circulated quietly among dedicated viewers. In it, Sukai's smile lingers half a second too long, his eyes searching Tan Songyun's face not as a co-star hitting a cue, but as someone trying to read an emotion unsaid. Tan Songyun, poised as ever, responds, but her gaze dips for a fleeting moment, almost imperceptible, as though avoiding something deeper than the script required. It was subtle, too subtle for casual viewers, but not for fans who had spent years watching them breathe life into characters that felt intimately human. Online forums lit up, not with wild rumors, but with careful observations, a tilt of the head during interviews, the way Sukai's tone would soften when her name was mentioned, the rare but telling pause in Tan Songyun's responses whenever questions drifted too close to their partnership. There was no scandal, no confirmed fallout, and that, perhaps, made the mystery even more suffocating. Because in an industry where conflict are often loud and public, silence becomes suspicious. Some fans pointed to timing. Around 2024, both actors began steering their careers in noticeably different directions. Sukai leaned into roles that demanded intensity, characters layered with internal conflict, often emotionally distant, as though he were retreating into personas that required isolation. Tan Songyun, on the other hand, gravitated towards stories rich in vulnerability and warmth, her performances radiating a grounded sincerity that felt deeply personal. Individually, they were thriving, but together, the absence became impossible to envision to avoid being typecast as a duo that audiences couldn't separate from their shared past? Or was there something deeper, something unspoken that neither was willing or perhaps able to reveal? The entertainment industry thrives on illusion, but what happens when illusion feels more real than reality itself? Clips from behind-the-scenes footage only complicate the narrative. Moments where laughter feels genuine, not rehearsed. Instances where the proximity seems natural, unguarded. Two individuals moving in sync without effort. Yet, in the final days of their last known project, fans began to notice a shift, subtle but undeniable. Their interactions became measured, still warm but cautious, still connected but restrained, as if an invisible boundary had been drawn, one that neither dared to cross again. International fans, particularly those in the United States and Europe, began analyzing their dynamic through a different lens. To them, it wasn't just about co-stars drifting apart. It felt like watching the quiet unraveling of something that once held emotional weight beyond the script. In Spain and across Asia, fan edits took on a more melancholic tone. Music slowed. Scenes replayed with a sense of nostalgia, as though documenting something that already ended, even if no one had officially said so. And perhaps that's what makes this mystery so compelling. There is no closure, no definitive answer, only fragments. A glance that lingered too long, a silence that spoke too loudly, a partnership that ended without ever being acknowledged as something that needed ending. Some insiders suggest it could be a strategic move, an effort to preserve individual identities in an industry that often locks actors into on-screen pairings that overshadow their versatility. Others whisper about personal boundaries, about moments that blurred the line between fiction and reality in ways that became too complicated to navigate. But none of these explanations fully satisfy the question that continues to echo across fan communities worldwide. Why did it stop so abruptly? Because when something fades naturally, it leaves a trail, a gradual distance, a visible shift. This wasn't that. This felt like a door quietly closing, soft enough not to attract attention, but firm enough that it wouldn't easily reopen. And yet, every so often, something happens that reignites the conversation. A social media post liked, then unliked. A fleeting mention in an interview that feels almost accidental. A project announcement that sparks hope, only to dissolve into silence again. Each moment is dissected, analyzed, felt, because for many, Soo Kai and Tan Songyun were never just co-stars. They were a rare alignment. Two performers whose connection felt unscripted, unpredictable, and deeply human. And now, that connection exists only in memories, in archived scenes, in the quiet space between what was and what could have been. But the most unsettling part of all, neither of them has ever truly explained why. And until they do, the silence will keep speaking. And yet, just when the silence began to feel permanent, like a chapter quietly sealed, something shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't official. But for those who had been watching closely, it was impossible to miss. A single frame from a recent industry event surfaced online, blurred at first, almost dismissible, but once sharpened, enhanced, replayed, the atmosphere changed. In the background, surrounded by flashing cameras and carefully managed appearances, stood Soo Kai, composed, distant, every inch a professional the world had come to recognize. But his gaze was not where it was supposed to be. It drifted, across the room, toward someone just outside the immediate spotlight, toward Tan Songyun. She wasn't looking at him, not directly. Her posture remained elegant, controlled, as though nothing unusual existed in that shared space. But her fingers, resting lightly against her clutch, tightened for just a fraction of a second, a micro-movement, barely visible, yet in that fleeting moment, something unspoken surged to the surface. Recognition, awareness, and perhaps restraint. Fans didn't just notice, it consumed them. The clip spread across platforms within hours, dissected frame by frame, slowed down until every blink, every breath carried meaning. In one version, Soo Kai's jaw seems to tense as he looks away too quickly, as if caught in a moment he hadn't planned to reveal. In another, Tan Songyun's smile falters ever so slightly before she turns, her expression resetting with practiced precision. It was an interaction, but it wasn't nothing, and that was enough to reignite everything. Theories, once quiet, grew louder, more detailed, more personal. Some began to revisit their final project together, not as a drama, but as a timeline, a sequence of emotional shifts hidden beneath scripted lines, scenes where their proximity felt charged with something heavier than performance, dialogues that now, in hindsight, sounded less like fiction and more like echoes of something real struggling to stay contained. One particular moment resurfaced with renewed intensity, a behind-the-scenes clip where Soo Kai reaches out, seemingly to adjust a prop, but pauses just before touching Tan Songyun's hand. The hesitation lasts less than a second, but it lingers like a question never asked. Tan Songyun notices. Her eyes flicker toward his hand, then back to his face. Neither speaks. The director calls for the next take. The moment dissolves. But now, it refuses to be forgotten, because hesitation like that doesn't come from nowhere, and avoidance, especially the kind that feels deliberate, rarely exists without a reason. Insiders, though still careful with their words, have begun hinting at something more layered. Not conflict, not rivalry, but complexity, the kind that doesn't explode outward, but instead folds inward, quiet, consuming, and impossible to articulate without risking everything around it. A connection that may have blurred lines, a boundary that may have been crossed, not in action, but in feeling, and once acknowledged, cannot be undone. For global audiences, especially those drawn to the emotional depth of K-dramas and C-dramas, the narrative feels hauntingly familiar. Two people bound by timing, circumstance, and something undeniably real, yet separated not by distance, but by decisions made in silence. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones that end dramatically. They're the ones that stop without explanation, and in that stopping, leave behind a tension that never fully resolves. Even now, neither Soo Kai nor Tan Songyun has addressed the moment. No statement, no denial, no closure. Only carefully curated appearances, controlled narratives, and a persistent absence of what once felt effortless between them. But the industry is watching. The fans are watching. And somewhere, beneath the layers of professionalism and distance, something still feels unfinished. Because glances like that don't just disappear. They wait. They linger. They return when least expected. So the question is no longer just why they stopped sharing the screen. It's whether they ever truly stop seeing each other at all. And if this silence is hiding something deeper, something unresolved, then what happens when it finally breaks? Because when it does, it won't just be a reunion. It will be a revelation. If you felt that tension, if you saw what others missed, if you believe there's more beneath the surface than what we've been shown, then stay close, keep watching, and don't look away, because the next piece of the story might change everything you thought you knew